let me give you, I mentioned Donald Hall. I don't know how much you know about poetry. Donald Hall was a bad poet. He was even a bad critic. He couldn't even write reviews well. He was a college professor. He dumped his first wife back, I guess, in the 60s or 70s for a woman named Jane Kenyon, who's another bad poet. Kenyon died in the mid to late 90s of breast cancer or something. And a year or so afterwards, this was right around the same time Ted Hughes died, husband of Sylvia Plath. Donald Hall went around and he wrote this terrible book of poetry, supposedly in praise of his dead wife. And I remember he came to Minneapolis where I was living at the time, and I went to the reading with a woman that I know, not romantic, but we were colleagues in poetry, and we went to it. It was at a church in Minneapolis, and we listened to him reading these poems. And I remember after the second or third poem, I knew how Donald Hall was going to react. And we got to one poem, and I said, as he starts reading, I said to this woman, I said, now he's going to cry in about 10, 15 seconds. And sure enough, he started weeping. He started weeping. I knew the way he was trying to manipulate it. And I'm not saying you can't have passion or you can't, if you're doing a reading where you have multiple characters, try to take on a little bit of a difference in the voice. But if you're reading something, you have to let the words come through. If I'm reading a poem, the words are of import, not necessarily how I'm emoting them. And this is one of the things that happens with slam poetry, especially whenever people do readings, is they try to cover up the execrable writing by doing the they do hand gesticulations, and they do this jazzy kind of runs, and it's like that's defeating the very purpose of why you're writing. If I'm reading a scene written about when my mom died, I don't need to tear up to get it. Now, if I'm genuinely moved, okay. But with Donald Hall, I knew exactly what he was doing. I knew how he was playing this audience of mostly old white people in the late 90s. And I just found it phony. And over the course of years, every so often for example, I once at a reading confronted Robert Bly, and I made specific claims about why his stuff was bad and why he sold out, because he actually had talent, unlike Hall, but he sold out, and he wrote this book Iron John that sparked the men's movement 30 years ago, and it was such a piece of shit. And I remember when I actually spoke to him when we were in a line for him to sign books. I didn't buy a book, but a friend of mine did. And, I said, I know and you know that you sold out. You gave up your talent to have this little bit of money and fame. And I said, why did you do it? And he didn't answer me because he couldn't. And now you could say, well, Dan, how could you be so impudent to do that? But how could he be so impudent to put out garbage, knowingly do so, and to not? And this gets recently, for example, I was talking with some friends because a number of people that I know in the arts, for one reason or another, are not pursuing the arts with the vigor and not making use of their talents enough. And I've had to tell a few of these people, and they get angry at you or whatnot. But ultimately, I think most of them know that I'm telling them the truth, and it might take a few years for them to get over that. But you have to put it out there. But again, go on to your next question.
Well, it just seems that, because I think I wrote to you recently that writing in particular is a very polite thing. And so the fact that I can only imagine what it was like, because you write in True Life about the Minneapolis Uptown Poetry Group, and I've been in poetry groups, obviously, and they're very polite things where you just encourage people mostly. It's all very useless. Do you think, confronting Donald Blind and stuff? Obviously, I've never really met you. I haven't been around your life. I only know what I've read about you. But since you seem to have such a gigantic body of work, a quite unprecedented amount of work that's quality, the stuff you sent me is all very few typos. I don't even know how you do that. If the amount of I don't even know how you do that.
I've got lots of typos.
Right. Well, do you think that you have? I don't know. Maybe a conspiracy theorist. Have you blacklisted yourself at all for going after these people?
I mean, I would call it blacklisting, but certainly there are people that Jessica sent around her stuff and my stuff years ago for years. When I started writing plays a few years ago, you know, they don't even get looked at. I don't think that there's anyone sitting, oh, we're going to screw Dan Schneider and his wife like that. But most of these people, they don't know what quality is. So let's say if I send a book of my poems, and I've been putting poem books recently up on Amazon. Uh, you know, if I have a great poem, if I have a book of great poems, great sonnets or whatnot, these motherfuckers, they're not going to know what's good or not. Someone who suckled on the tit of David Foster Wallace or Alice Walker is not going to have a fucking clue about what good writing, prose or poetry is. How can they? You know, if all you're exposed to is garbage, how can that person know what quality is? And so, you know, oh, like I said earlier, I said, you know, plot is character. Well, I think about books, and I'm not saying you can't have a plot or whatnot. There was a woman that I knew 20 some years ago. This young girl who was uh, I won't get into it, but I mean, she claimed she wanted to be a poet and whatnot, and we almost got you know, intimate. And years later, she's married to some guy, and she's down. She's lived all over the world in the U.S. and other countries with her husband. And I saw a post that she did because on Facebook or whatnot, you know, people's names come up every month or so, a couple of months. You know, friend this person, friend that person, and I guess they have the algorithms that they can see your old emails and whatnot. I saw her thing come up, so I clicked on her Facebook thing, and she had on her wall, she had this terrible idea for a book, sort of I forget what it was, taking the basic plot of Moby Dick but making it into some kind of uh, trans trans tale about life in the 20th century or something, and it was an absurd thing, but she had a whole timeline on her wall where she'd have post-its of each year on it. That book is doomed. Even let's say if she had writing talent, which I don't know if she ever made of anything of it, what you're doing is you're circumscribing the art to such a degree that there's no way that it's going to be inclusive, no way that it's going to reach out. When I write something like this novel that I just finished, or when I write True Life, you have to have an overall overarching idea, but you have to be ready so that when you're in 70% of the way into the book and something isn't working, you say, I've got to do this. And then that necessitates you going back and changing certain elements. Or you might have the best idea for your book, or if you're making films, 75% of the way in. Well, what are you going to do? Are you going to stick with the original idea just because it would be easier? No, you have to go back. You have to have that organic process where everything keeps bubbling. My wife Jessica just wrote an essay on James Joyce's The Dead that she's going to be putting on this fellow Alex Sherimit's website. I don't know if you've ever seen Alex's stuff, but
Yeah,
yeah. So it's about the dead, and in the end of that, which I think is his best work, that short story. You know, he constantly talks about the rain, not the rain, the snow falling everywhere over islands, snowfall. You have to have ideas bubbling. I could show you. You know, I have whole uh, notebooks and papers and folders with ideas for plays. And when I was doing poetry for poetry, I'd have post-its all over the place. Um, you have to constantly keep doing that. And so if I'm writing a play about, for example, I'm going to do a play about Catherine the Great sometime this year. If I'm going to do a play about Catherine the Great, and I'm 2/3 of the way through, and something comes to me, I'm going to go with what works and what makes for the best art. Even if it's more difficult, and even if it's not what I intended, because you know what, if I decide to write a poem about Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of Poland, and it turns out that it's really a poem about Hitler and his dog, well, I can always go back to Barbarossa. If the poem it pulls me to write about Hitler's love for his dogs, I can always go back to Operation Barbarossa. But people get so obsessed, they don't have any plasticity to their creativity. One of the things is you have to be open to it, so that when something comes along, you go with that. This gal that I was almost involved with years ago, her novel is doomed. Even if she is a good, solid, passable writer, it's going to be a stiff, uh, lifeless book because you can't do that plotting things out and uh, character X's ex-wife has gastritis on Tuesday when chapter 13 is set. Must make sure that people know that she's farting a lot. What the fuck does it have to do with literature? You know?
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the things. Sometimes I tell people, if you're not willing to throw out the entire whatever it is, because sometimes you have an idea and you're so married to the idea. You're like, no, this is what the thing is. It's nothing else. This is what it is. And if I throw it all away, I've got nothing. But if you're not willing to be able to just do that, to just completely catapult everything you've done, we can just start over.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I said with you commented on the writing style in True Life, and I told you how I did that by cutting out 180,000 words from the 4-book series. Well, it would have basically been the same work if I hadn't gotten rid of all the articles and conjunctions and prepositions and that were unnecessary. But it may not have hooked you in as tightly because of the slight oddity of that approach that gives that immediacy. And so, I did it. So I took an extra month, 6 weeks or whatever it was, and I went through all the books and I basically just, carved them down to the essentials.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think one, I can't remember which one. All four books kind of blur together a little bit at this point. But you said this thing that I wish more writers would say about how this is a waltz or something. This is two people here. We got the writer, we got the person who wrote it, but we also have the reader. And too often than not, there's no attention given to the actual reading experience of the person reading it. So one of the things I felt when I was reading True Life and Tumbleweeds recently and that I appreciate, because sometimes it's like you just have the writer just writing, it's like they're talking to themselves. Pretty sure that's something you said.
Yeah.
It's just like they're talking to themselves, that they have no actual respect for the reader. And it seems like you absolutely do, and you're trying to intentionally make a really good pleasurable thing for us to read. It feels good when you have someone who feels like they know what they're doing, whether it's like making your food or if they wrote a book, they know what they're doing and they expect you to have a good time or at least to enjoy what they're actually doing. They have a plan for you.
If I'm asking you to spend 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever it takes to read my book or read my play or even 2 minutes to read a sonnet of mine, I'm asking you for a part of your life. I mean,
Yeah.
I have to give something back in exchange, if all I'm gonna write about is, here's this sexy bitch I knew in '93, here's a love poem I wrote about her, and that isn't necessarily going to excite you. But if I write about that girl in a way that you can say, oh, I knew a girl like that when I studied in Bonn, Germany, whatnot. Then there's that hook into it. But people, like I said, people just want to write about themselves. It's my life. But the reason that we know about great artists, and the reason that there are books like Giorgio Vasari's Lives of the Artists, which is a book that I read many times as a kid about the medieval and Renaissance painters and their lives. Not that the lives were necessarily that interesting, but people want to know about it because something hooks them. If you want to know about the life of Stanley Kubrick because you saw Dr. Strangelove or The Shining or 2001: A Space Odyssey, you want to know about that because you want to know, but how is he or she able to do this that would get me to want to know how they did it? But no one really is going to be asking about the greeting card verse of a Maya Angelou or about the masturbatory bullshit of a David Foster Wallace. I'll guarantee you that in the year 2050, there will be a number of David Foster Wallace clones who will be propagated, and David Foster Wallace will slowly fall away. It's happening in painting. All of the abstract expressionists, Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, with drip paintings and painting a canvas with one fucking color. I mean, that's bullshit. That's insulting. And finally now, 50 years after the deaths of most of those guys, people are saying, yeah, there was bullshit. You know, it's slowly happening, but my guess is by 2050 or so, most people are going to look back at abstract expressionism and people are going to laugh at it and say, boy, people were really stupid to think this was something.